I've been a 911 dispatcher for about 6 years now. It's not the kind of job you dream about as a kid, but somehow I ended up here, sitting behind a desk, answering calls from people in their worst moments. And let me tell you, it changes you. I've had nights where I went home feeling like I saved a life, but I've had just as many where I couldn't sleep. The sound of someone screaming for help sticks with you, like it's etched into your brain. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what started last month. It was late, around 2:30 a.m., the kind of quiet shift where you almost start to relax. The hum of the dispatch center was soothing in a way. Just me, the computer screens, and the occasional buzz of the phone. I had a coffee in front of me, half drunk and cold, when the line rang. 911, what's your emergency? I said, my voice steady, like always. There was static at first, a crackling sound like an old radio trying to find its signal. Then I heard it, a voice. It was a man, and he sounded off, weak, like he was struggling to get the words out. Help, please, I'm hurt. I leaned forward, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. Sir, can you tell me your location? What happened? There was a pause, and then he coughed, a deep, wet sound that made me wince. I don't know. I'm by the old highway. Please, hurry. I started typing, pulling up the map for the area he mentioned. Okay, stay on the line. We're sending help. Can you see any landmarks or road signs? But before I could get more, the line went dead. I sat there for a second, staring at the screen, feeling uneasy. Calls drop all the time, but something about this one didn't sit right with me. I ran the number through the system, trying to get an exact location. The trace came back quickly, a stretch of highway just outside of town. It was a quiet road, mostly used by truckers and people avoiding the main route. I flagged it as urgent and sent the call out to the nearest officer. He radioed back a few minutes later, letting me know he was on his way. And then, nothing. About 20 minutes passed before he called me back, his voice calm but confused. I just drove the whole stretch, he said. There's no one here. No cars, no signs of an accident. You sure this was the right location? I felt my stomach twist. The trace was clear as day. That's what the system shows, I replied, my voice steady, even though my pulse was racing. Maybe he walked off the road? Could you check again? Already did, he said. There's nothing. He sounded certain, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I thanked him and closed the case as unresolved, but the call lingered in my mind for the rest of the shift. It wasn't just the voice or the way the call ended. It was the silence that followed. It felt wrong, like the kind of quiet that hides something waiting to be found. By the time my shift ended, I told myself it was just a one-off, maybe a prank or a bad connection, but deep down, I knew better. A few nights later, I was back at the dispatch center. Same shift, same coffee, and the same empty building. After the call from the old highway, I couldn't shake this sense of unease. I even went as far as to check the logs, hoping to find something I might have missed. Nothing. No follow-up. No accidents reported in that area. It was like the call had never happened. I told myself to move on, but around 3 a.m. the phone rang again. 911, what's your emergency? I asked, my tone automatic, almost bored. What I heard on the other end stopped me cold. There was a woman crying, deep, guttural sobs that sent a chill through me. Ma'am, are you okay? Can you tell me what's happening? They won't let me out, she gasped between sobs. I've been screaming for hours, but they won't let me out. Please help me. I straightened in my chair, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Who won't let you out? Where are you? Her voice cracked as she tried to explain. I'm at home. They're inside. They won't leave. I typed the address she gave me into the system. As soon as it popped up on the screen, my blood ran cold. It was an address I recognized, one I would never forget. 3 years ago, I'd taken a call from the same house. A domestic disturbance. A man had barricaded his wife inside, threatening to kill her. By the time officers arrived, it was too late. The woman had been murdered, and the man had turned the knife on himself. I felt my throat go dry. Ma'am, I said carefully, can you confirm your name? She gave it to me, and I froze. It was her, the woman from that night. That's impossible, I whispered under my breath. What? What's impossible? She asked, panic creeping into her voice. I didn't answer. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely grip the phone. Stay with me, I said, though my voice wavered. I'm sending help. Just stay on the line. I dispatched an officer to the address, every muscle in my body screaming that this wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But as I sat there, waiting for the officer to report back, I heard something on the line. It was faint, but it was there. Whispers, just behind the woman's crying. Low, guttural voices that sent shivers down my spine. "Who else is in the house with you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She didn't answer. Instead, she let out a blood-curdling scream, and the line went dead. I stared at the phone, my heart pounding in my ears. A part of me wanted to call the officer back and tell him to leave, but I didn't. Protocol wouldn't allow it. Minutes dragged by, and then the radio crackled to life. "I'm at the address," the officer said. "It's empty. The house has been boarded up for years. Are you sure this is the right place?" I swallowed hard, my stomach twisting into knots. "That's the address she gave me." "There's no one here," he said, his voice uneasy. "But I swear, I thought I heard something. A woman crying." The line went quiet for a second, and then he added, "I think I'll take another look around." "Don't," I blurted out, louder than I intended. There was a long pause before he finally replied, "Copy that, heading back now." He sounded as relieved as I felt. I logged the call and sat back, staring at the empty dispatch center. The air felt heavier, like the room itself was closing in on me. 2 calls, 2 voices, and both from people who shouldn't be alive. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew one thing for sure. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. A week passed, but the tension didn't. Every time the phone rang, my heart raced. I told myself it was just my imagination. Stress, lack of sleep. But deep down, I knew better. By now, the other dispatchers were noticing something was off. One even joked that I looked like I'd seen a ghost. If only they knew. It was a Friday night, just past 1 a.m. The shift had been relatively calm, and I was almost convincing myself that things were back to normal. And then it happened again. The phone rang, loud and shrill, cutting through the quiet. My stomach dropped as I reached for it, my hand trembling slightly. 911, what's your emergency?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. This time there was no static, no crying, just a voice. A child's voice. "I can't find my mom," the boy said, his tone small and scared. I swallowed hard, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. "What's your name, sweetheart? Can you tell me where you are?" "Tommy," he said. "I'm at the park. I was playing with my mom, but now she's gone." Something about his tone tugged at me. It wasn't just fear, it was emptiness, like he was reciting lines he barely understood. "Which park, Tommy? Can you see any signs or buildings nearby?" He hesitated, and then he said a name I recognized. It was a park on the east side of town, not far from where I lived. "I'm sending someone to help you," I said, typing in the location. "Can you tell me what your mom looks like, or what she was wearing?" But Tommy didn't answer. Instead, I heard the sound of wind, soft at first, then louder, like a storm building in the background. And then a whisper. "She's here. She found me." My breath caught. "Tommy, what do you mean?" "She's here," he repeated, his voice almost mechanical now. "But she doesn't look right. She's different." The line went silent. I stared at the phone, my mind racing. Every instinct told me to hang up, but I couldn't. It was like I was frozen, waiting for something else to come through. And then it did. A low, guttural sound, halfway between a growl and a laugh. It echoed through the receiver, sending a chill down my spine. "Tommy?" I whispered, even though I knew he wouldn't answer. The line went dead. I called an officer, giving him the park's location and as much detail as I could muster without sounding insane. He didn't question me, but his tone was uneasy. "I'll check it out," he said. The next 15 minutes felt like hours. I kept staring at the screen, half expecting another call to come through. When the officer finally radioed back, his voice was tense. "I'm at the park. It's empty," he said. "No sign of a kid or anyone else." "Did you check the playground?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah. Swings are moving, though. Could just be the wind." I opened my mouth to respond, but he cut me off. "Wait. There's something here." My heart sank. "What is it?" There was a long pause before he spoke again. "A shoe. Looks like a kid's." I felt a wave of nausea. "And the kid?" "No sign of him," he said, his voice flat. "But I'm calling it in. Something's not right here." I thanked him and ended the call, but the unease stayed with me. I didn't even log the call, not properly. I just sat there staring at the screen, wondering if I'd imagined the whole thing. But as I replayed the boy's voice in my head, I knew I hadn't. There was something else out there. Something using the phones, the voices, the memories of people who were long gone. And it wasn't done with me yet. After the call from the boy at the park, I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was happening wasn't random. The voices, the cries for help, they were too real, yet impossibly tied to things that shouldn't exist. By now, I'd started to dread going to work. Every time I put on the headset, I felt like I was inviting something unnatural into my life. But quitting wasn't an option. Not yet. I had to understand what was happening. It was a quiet night, eerily so. My coworkers had gone for a coffee break, leaving me alone in the dispatch center. I stared at the clock, 3:03 a.m., and tried to focus on the hum of the computers to calm my nerves. The phone rang. I flinched, the sound cutting through the silence like a knife. Slowly, I reached for the receiver, my hand trembling. 911, what's your emergency? At first, there was silence. Not static, not whispers, just an oppressive, suffocating silence. I was about to hang up when I heard a voice, and this time it wasn't a stranger. "Hey, it's me," the voice said casually. I froze. I knew that voice. It belonged to my friend Mike, a paramedic I used to work with. We'd shared dozens of calls over the years, swapping horror stories and dark jokes to cope with the things we'd seen. But Mike was dead. He'd died in a car accident 6 months ago. "Mike," I whispered, my throat dry. "Yeah, man," he said, his tone light, almost playful. "How's it going? Still saving the world one call at a time." My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. This isn't funny," I stammered. "Funny?" he repeated, his voice dropping into something colder. "You think this is a joke?" I couldn't answer. My hand gripped the phone so tightly, my knuckles turned white. "Listen," he said, his tone shifting again, calmer now, almost pleading. "I need your help. I'm in trouble." I swallowed hard. "Where are you?" "I'm at the intersection," he said, naming a spot I knew well. It was the site of his accident. "I need you to send someone. Please. I don't have much time." I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Every instinct told me to hang up, to end this nightmare before it got worse. But instead, I found myself asking, "What kind of trouble?" "They're coming for me," he said, his voice trembling now. "I can't get away. Please just send someone." The line crackled, and for a moment, I thought I heard something else in the background. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and then a low, guttural growl. "Mike, what's going on?" I asked, my voice rising. "They're here," he screamed. "Help me." The line went dead. I sat there, staring at the phone, my chest heaving. This wasn't just a coincidence anymore. This was targeted, personal. Against every instinct, I called the location into an officer. He didn't question it, probably chalked it up to another accident report or prank call. But I could hear the unease in his voice as he acknowledged the dispatch. I waited, the minutes dragging like hours. Finally, the radio crackled. "I'm at the intersection," the officer said. "No signs of anyone. But what?" I asked, leaning forward. "There's a car here. It's mangled, like it's been sitting here for years. The tag matches a report from months ago. Isn't this?" He trailed off. I knew what he was going to say before he said it. "Mike's car," I finished for him. "Yeah," he said, "but there's something else." My heart sank. "What?" "There's a phone in the driver's seat. It's smashed to hell, but..." He hesitated, and when he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. "It's still ringing." I didn't respond. I couldn't. The officer ended the call, but I stayed at my desk, staring into the empty room. The hum of the computers sounded distant, like I was underwater. Mike was gone. I'd attended his funeral. I'd seen his body in the casket. And yet somehow, he'd called me. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just a series of strange, unexplainable events. This was something worse. Something alive. The days after Mike's call were a blur. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. The lines between work and my personal life had started to blur, and no matter where I was, I felt like I was being watched. I had stopped telling anyone about the calls. The other dispatchers wouldn't believe me, and even if they did, what could they do? This was something beyond all of us. Then one night, it happened again. The phone rang, sharp and shrill, piercing through the silence. I didn't want to answer. My gut told me to let it ring, to let someone else take it. But I was alone in the dispatch center again. There was no one else. With a deep breath, I picked up the receiver. 911, what's your emergency? For a moment, there was only silence. Then a voice I hadn't heard in years. It's me. My heart dropped into my stomach. It was my mother. She died 5 years ago, peacefully, in her sleep. We'd had a good relationship, but like any family, there were unresolved things I'd never had the chance to say. Mom, I whispered, tears stinging my eyes. I need you to listen, she said. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it, a kind of urgency that made my skin crawl. You have to stop answering the phone. What? I stammered. This thing, it feeds on you. Every time you pick up, you let it in a little more. It knows you. It's coming for you. I wanted to argue, to demand answers, but the line went dead before I could say another word. That night, I didn't go home. I couldn't. Instead, I sat at my desk, staring at the phone, daring it to ring again. Around 4 a.m., I must have dozed off because when I opened my eyes, I wasn't in the dispatch center anymore. I was in a dark room. The walls were covered in peeling wallpaper, and the air was thick with the smell of mildew. I tried to move, but my feet wouldn't budge. Then I heard it, the sound of a phone ringing. It was faint at first, like it was coming from somewhere far away, but it got louder, closer, until it felt like it was inside my head. I turned around, and there it was, a rotary phone, sitting on a table in the center of the room. It rang again, and before I could stop myself, I picked it up. Hello? There was no voice this time, just static. But in the static, I heard something else, whispers, low and guttural, overlapping and impossible to understand. And then a single, clear word, run. The phone went dead, and the room plunged into darkness. I woke up back at my desk, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding like a drum. I quit my job the next day. I told my supervisor I couldn't do it anymore, that I needed to get away. They didn't ask questions. Maybe they'd seen the fear in my eyes, or maybe they just didn't care. But leaving didn't stop the calls. At first, it was just in my dreams. The same rotary phone, the same dark room. But then, they started bleeding into my waking life. My personal cell would ring, and I'd see numbers that shouldn't exist, long strings of digits that made no sense. I stopped answering. But the messages kept coming. One night, my phone buzzed, and against my better judgment, I looked at the screen. It was a text. Why don't you answer anymore? I dropped the phone and backed away, but then the landline in my apartment rang. It was louder than any phone should have been, the sound reverberating through the room like a scream. I didn't answer, but the ringing didn't stop. And then something worse happened. The whispers started, not from the phone, but from everywhere. They were in the walls, the ceiling, the air itself. Answer, they hissed. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The voices were inside my head now, echoing, relentless. That's when I realized the truth. I thought the calls were coming from the dead, but they weren't. They were coming from it. A thing. Something ancient, something that lived in the static, the frequencies, the spaces between the lines. And it wasn't just watching me. It was consuming me. I ran out of the apartment that night and never went back. But it didn't matter. No matter where I go, I hear it. The ringing, the whispers. I can't escape it. And if you're reading this, maybe you'll hear it too. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more chilling tales.